Jakes, welcome back. Hey, I'm really enjoying doing these videos for you guys, believe it or not. Actually, just before I start talking about this chapter, Matins, you guys are all saying that this novel is a rash and it's terrible to read and it's the worst book you've ever read, and I want to challenge you just to give it a chance, because I actually think it's a really good novel. I enjoyed it. I like the themes that come through and what it deals with, and I think if you give it a chance and you actually engage with it, you might actually get something out of it instead of hating it for the next couple of weeks. So let's look at this this chapter called Matins. And Matins is it's what it actually means is it's a service of morning prayer in various churches, especially the Anglican Church. And really what it refers to is ritual, a morning ritual, something that you would do over and over again every single morning. And so the description that Lally gives, especially in this beginning, or the narrator gives of Lally's life at boarding school, especially at the beginning of this chapter, is this whole idea of the ritual of school. I want to pick up on some of the passages here, or portions here, that really start talking about the themes. And we start at this stage of the novel really becoming more aware of the difference between black and white, of a divided country, and of how that impacts someone like Lally and other characters in the story. Remember, this ultimately revolves around Lally's decision to return at the end of the novel to testify at the TRC about Nomda's son. And so we've got to keep that in the back of our mind all the time. Listen to what it says on the first page of this chapter. It says, "The White District still slumbers, but the township sprawled across the marshland, the river marshland to the south of the valley, is alive with the excited barking of dogs, ending their lonely night vigils and disintegrating drifts of wood smoke from 1,000 pots of putu stewing over 1,000 fires." Really just the start of a picture of what South Africa was like in those days, where the black folk who worked in the white people's houses and schools and all of that were getting up much earlier than the white people were. We also meet the cadet master, Major Carlton, who is from Rhodesia, which is what Zimbabwe is called now. And he is a really just a typical sort of Southern African white man in that time, who sees black people as the enemy and black people as ruining the future of the country. And he leaves Rhodesia because he has a terrible experience there. His wife is dismembered, so he brings his daughters down to South Africa. And this is what he says. He says, "South Africa has a better fighting chance. Anyway, our backs against the wall. We're the last hope for the white man in Africa. And if this nation falls, it won't be because the boys from this school were underprepared." So he prepares them. He's the cadet master. Back in those days, and I experienced that, and other teachers from that period will remember it. Probably Mr. Broom, Mr. Campbell Atkins will remember this. We used to do cadets at school. We used to march in brown uniforms. It was very irritating. It was very cold. Uniforms generally didn't fit. And Lally watches these boys from the school marching every morning. The interesting sort of part of this is how it reflects how society looked those days. At the end of the marching, the major gets his privates to search in search of invisible Matabele. That's a tribe of black people. So half of the boys play the Matabele and half the boys play the South African Defence Force. There's this fight that goes on, and this is what it says. It says the SADF, which is the Defence Force, are slugging the enemy with their imaginary firearms, and those impersonating the enemy, so those boys pretending to be black people, are dying, as Africans are understood to at the stroke, like impalas trapped by lions without fussing about the last words, because Africans think collectively and not individually, which makes them the major stressors, and again and again, a formidable enemy in battle. And there's this very, very racist viewpoint from this major, that the black people need to be beaten, and it's the white man's plight in life to protect his country. It's very interesting then in the next paragraph that the narrator says this: "The arrival of the real Africans who are singing but fall silent once they pass the gatepost." And it's like all the life that they have, all that they are changes. The minute they move into this traditionally white environment, all that changes. So this novel deals with some very difficult things. And I want to say to you, the novel isn't making a moral stand about right and wrong necessarily here, and about whites and which, were whites wrong or blacks wrong or the other way around, or it's simply telling the story of the reality of time in those days. So when we read this, we mustn't get our backs up, but we must be challenged by the ideas that come up. How's this? The children call the men who work in the ground garden boys. The women cook and serve are called kitchen girls. These are men and women who are called boys and girls. The women who clean the school block are called Sisi, which is a Khoza Afrikaans hybrid term for little sister. And so even the women who clean their dorms, there's no respect. They are little sisters. Further on, we read of the map on the world that's stuck on the notice board, and they can pray for their families who go overseas and all that kind of thing. But I want to focus on this. Lally says, it's written about Lally, she has not seen much of the world. She only really knows the school where she lives, Pim's farm, and where she goes for exits, and her own farm where she spends 3 weeks in the spring, 3 weeks in the autumn, and 6 weeks in the summer. And she doesn't even really know if she knows her own farm anymore. And we get this really sad, poignant reflection of a girl who is still young but actually has no home. And she probably feels more at home at Pim's than she does at her own house. She talks about driving back to the farm when she was younger. She says when they got there it felt different and unfamiliar, and in the evening when her mother ran a bath and tried to undress her, Lally slapped her hands away. And it's almost like this, her being in boarding school has disconnected her from her mother, and very much the unemotional Lally we read about almost this entire novel. It has a lot to do with the disconnect between her and her parents. She prefers Pim's farm to her own because she says when she's at her own house, they all pretend they belong to each other, when in the end, of course, you only belong to yourself. And this is key to understanding Lally and the way she thinks. She really thinks she belongs to herself. And that's why it's very difficult in the beginning, I believe, for her to engage with the idea of testifying at the TRC, because if you live for yourself and you live selfishly, then why would you want to go back and inconvenience yourself and speak about the past and remember a past that you don't want to remember? And that's why I believe right in the beginning of the novel she so vehemently is against the idea of returning to South Africa to speak up for Nomda's son. There's another short, and we're near the end here, there's another short subheading, or it's a fairly long piece, but there's not much meaning other than one or two things that I want to mention. There's a short heading called Diversions. And in that diversion, Lally and Zulu and Fat Betty go to their teacher, Mrs. Mackenzie's house, and they meet her husband, Dr. Mackenzie, the optometrist, and they get to watch the television. And really, for me, what is crucial about this, apart from the fact that Fat Betty and Zulu kiss and there's that whole encounter, the really important thing for me is that watching the news for Lally, and particularly when she sees Paris, gives her a sense of the larger world out there. And I think when she sees that, she actually realizes there's a way out of this life. I don't have to be here forever. And we see her now living that life, and it's not actually a wonderful life. It's boring, there's no challenge. She's just still emotionally disconnected. In fact, at the end of that chapter, we read this: up on the ceiling, the dim light flowing around the edges of her hand shape makes a shadow just like the Eiffel Tower. And maybe these thoughts of Paris, of the Eiffel Tower, and of Europe give her some, I don't know, sense of hope that there's life beyond what she's experiencing now. But it really is very poignant and sad. This whole chapter, it's laced with sadness, and you understand what a desperate situation this young girl Lally is actually in, and we understand the older Lally a whole lot better because of this understanding of how she grew up and what boarding life was like for her. That's the end of this tutorial, quite a long one, but I think some meaty stuff there for you to understand. The next chapter we're going to look at is a chapter called Pont à la Tour, which is the name of a restaurant in London. You can Google it, it's still there. It's on the River Thames near the Tower of London. But until next time, cheers. I hope you guys are doing well and reading this novel.